Hi, this is Matt Hickey with ePrep Solutions. The report that we're going to be covering today, I'm going to go to the report guide here. So hopefully you have a copy of this already. Um, the report that we're going to be covering today is on page 10, and it's called the Actual and Projected Cost Recovery for Courses by Service Category. So before I dig into this report, and if you do have this document, you can use this to review and go back to if need be. But before I go into this report is covering an area what we call service categorization. So I just want to review very quickly what service categorization is. So in this matrix, you'll see it's a comparison to network television and Parks and Recreation. So on the right-hand side here, you'll see what the services are. So in this grouping here, we have youth t-ball, beginning yoga, and learn to swim level 1. That's the service that's being offered. So each one of these is, youth t-ball on Mondays and Wednesdays for 8 weeks at 5 o'clock, that type of thing. That is within the service area of sports. And so service areas are tied to budget. So you can think of all the sports programs are in one big budget area. So that's a service area. And then in addition to that, we have service categorization. So generally service categorization, what that is, it's a way of grouping like services based on what a cost recovery or subsidy level goal could be. So you can see that a service category could be skill-based beginner, skill-based intermediate, skill-based advanced, monitored access. You could have tiers. You could have service categorization. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. But what I wanted to focus your attention on here is that a service category, you could have a service area of sports in many different categories. And so the service area and service categorization are two different things. So let's get into the report itself. So the report that we're going to be looking at is under coordinator reports on the left-hand side, and it's the very first report. And just for reference, this report that we're going to be covering is the same exact report for facility rentals, facility memberships, and for facility point of sale items. I'm only going to be covering this one report under coordinator reports because it's the same for all of them. So let's go ahead and click on that. So you'll always be reporting on a specific scenario, and a scenario is a set of management decisions, which we'll get to in a little bit more detail here in just a second. So the scenario that I'm going to be reporting on for all our videos is Anytown USA 2021 cost recovery. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Again, that's a set of management decisions. I'm going to hit display report. So this is the report. And as we look at the report, I'll be going through each of the different columns here to give you more detail. So the stuff up front here is just name of the client, anything like that. And then we get to the categorization. So in this example, we've got C, R, and E, and C is not pictured. So instead of doing skill-based beginner, intermediate, advanced, they came up with community, recreation for the R, and exclusive for E. And so community would be things like park, no shelter, no sports fields, no playgrounds, just an empty park that you wouldn't necessarily charge for. And so this specific client decided not to analyze those things. So we're starting with the R levels here. So we've got R2, 4, 5, 6, E1, 2, and 3. And again, E is exclusive, R is recreation. So within each of these categories, we could have sports, dance, leagues, fitness, aquatics. Each one of those, you could have aquatics in each one of these categories. You could have sports in each one of these categories. You could have culture in each one of these categories. It just depends on the specific service itself. So as we look at this, within the categorizations, here's the actual revenue that was brought in the fiscal year that we're analyzing. This is the total revenue for the total number of programs that were offered. And if you look over here to the right, you can see the total number of programs offered. So for example, in R6, there are 1,034 total programs out of 1,755, or 59%. They account for 59% of all programming in R6. So that's the revenue here. The expense, so what this expense is by service area, we've figured out the total cost to offer all your services. So that includes direct and indirect, specific to, say, aquatics, dance, sports, so on and so forth. The indirect allocation that we've done, which is a percent of budget allocation. So that is covering admin expenses. So everything from director, HR, marketing, supervision of the programs, et cetera. And then in addition to that, we also have facility costs in here. And so as part of the past process, you've given us your facilities, the expense to operate those facilities, how long you operate them, et cetera. And we've determined what the per hour cost is, say, for a half gym or a lap lane or a fitness room or a sports field. So if a program is using any of those facilities, since we know what the cost is per hour, we can allocate those costs to the program. So again, everything, all costs are included in this expense. So once we know the revenue and the expense for those service areas, or sorry, service categories, we're then going to be looking at what the average, or excuse me, what the actual cost recovery was, what the lowest was, what the highest was, and what the average is. And I'll state right now that this average is a weighted average, which I'll speak to in just a minute. So this first category is this, again, this means that at least one of these 53 classes in R5 has a minimum percent cost recovery, actual cost recovery of 15%. One program has the highest at 86, and then the weighted average is 31. So what I'd like to do now is drill down into this specific category to show you a little bit more detail and to describe to you how we can start to look at and use this report to decide if the information that we've provided is one, accurate, and or two, will we be using this information to move forward with making our management decision cost recovery goal. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this R5. And in any report, anytime you see something underlined or in deep blue, you can click on it to get more detail. So go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to use the same scenario that I'm reporting on to display a new report, which is a very detailed report, which I'll be covering in a separate video. So what this report is showing us is it's the 53 classes in R5 and in the different service areas. So you can see in health and wellness, there are 3. In general weights, there's 50. So that's the 53, and it's broken up by service area there. And so we can see the actual classes themselves as well. So this is the actual, this is the barcode, the start and end time, so on and so forth. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to scroll over to the right. And again, I'll be covering this report in a separate video. The column that I wanted to get to is actual cost recovery here. So you can see the actual cost recoveries. For this one, it was 46, 43, 26, so on and so forth. And then as we get down here, we'll see 50, 60, 73, 33. So what I want to focus our attention on right now is this specific area here. So if we scroll back over to the left, you'll see that these are all the same class, right? It's group strength training. It's meeting for an hour, right? They're all meeting for an hour. They meet 15 times, 16 times, 32 times, 48 times. So they're all going up there. So all of these are the same exact class, but they're meeting it for the same amount of time, but per day, but their number of days that they're meeting is different. So if we scroll back over, so let's look at, so like this one here met 16 times, and this one here, let's use this one, met 32 times. So again, same exact class, it's just the number of times that they're meeting is different. They met for an hour, their minimums are the same. Looks like they're using the same facility. So that theoretically is everything's the same except the number of times they meet. So as I scroll back over to the right, you notice that this one that met 16 times has a cost recovery of an actual cost recovery of 73%. So their total revenue was $1,760. The total cost to put on this course was $2,419. So this is the total course expense, and this is it by purchase of them. So the total cost was $2,400. They brought in $1,700. They have a 73% cost recovery. If we look at this next one that met 32 times, let me just make sure I said that correctly. Yes, 32 times. You'll notice that the expense is pretty much doubled because it's meeting twice as often. And so if we look at the amount of revenue for the second class, it did bring in more revenue. Sorry, that's the subsidy there. It did bring in more revenue, just slightly, but it has a lower cost recovery, an actual cost recovery. And the reason for that is because it's twice as expensive to offer that class. But this is the type of information you can start to look at and start to discern, is the information that you've entered correct? Is the minimum correct? Is the number of times you meet correct? So on and so forth. So I would highly recommend using this report to kind of start yourself out to say, is the information that we've inputted into the system as good or as accurate as we can make it? So now as I go back to the report, I'm going to concentrate now on this weighted average, what we call weighted average. So what you're seeing here is not a true average. As I said, that if you divide this by this, it's not 175%. So if we go back and look at R5 and we go look at the 31 to get to that average, I'm going to show you specifically how do we get to that 31%. So I'm going to go back to the column of actual cost recovery. It's the column here. And you'll see, again, these are the individual actual cost recoveries for each program. And so what the percentages that we're showing you on the report is it's an average. You can see here, this is an average. You'll see my cursor average. You'll see there's an average of 31%. So what we're doing is we're averaging all the cost recovery, actual cost recoveries versus just subtract or dividing the total revenue by the total expense. And so the reason we use this number is we feel it's a more accurate way of representing, excuse me, I'm gonna hit the back button again. It's a more accurate way of representing what the total number of programs are doing within this category. Because the idea behind service categorization is that in theory, you might have a range of say 10 to 15, 65 to 75, 90 to 95. There might be a range for your categories, and you'd always start with the lowest when you start the analysis. But in theory, if we have a 50% cost recovery goal, we want that for all programs in here. So by using this, showing you this 31%, we're showing you an average of all the actuals themselves. And so again, that's why we feel like this is a better number to use. So when looking at these numbers, as soon as when you get these numbers to the point where you feel they're as good as they're going to get, or as they're accurate as they're going to get, or they're exactly where they're at when you started, you can then use these numbers to help determine what these actual cost recovery goals should be. So let's go look at what these actual cost recovery, this management decision looks like. So, and again, I always recommend having multiple tabs open when you're doing this work. So on the main dashboard page, we're going to go to click here to create management decisions. And you use the same login. If you're not already logged in, you'll use the same login you use for past. And it takes you to the import page, and then we're going to hit view to go to the scenario page. So this is the scenario page. So again, this is where you would create a new scenario. And what a scenario is a collection of management decisions. So you'll see the default scenario. These are all the management decisions you get to make. And then the 2021 cost recovery, same exact management decisions. So again, a scenario is just a grouping of management decisions. So let's look at the cost recovery, service category cost recovery goal management decision. So as I open this up, I'm going to click on this column here just to sort it. You'll see R2, R4, R5, R6, 25, 40, 50, 60, 25, 40, 50, 60. So these are the goals that we've set. Now let's say that you want to you were looking at R5 and we have it set at 50%. Now normally, an R2 is going to have a lower cost recovery goal than an R4, or else why have the categorization, correct? So as we look at this, if we start out at 25, you could go to 30 there if you wanted to. And now, but here we've gone to 50. So in theory, for an R5, we have to be between 40 and 60, if that's the lower end and the upper end of the categories above and below it. So if we look at 50, we're currently at an average of 31%. Our actual revenue for that year was 70,000. If we have a goal of 50%, our projected revenue is going to be 130. So about $50,000 more than what we're currently at. So just off the top of your head, you can think of, well, that's about a 20% jump. Can I afford to have a 20% increase in my fees? That's one way of thinking about it. I wouldn't land on that, but that's one way of thinking about it. So if we were to keep with this 50%, our projected revenue would be 130. Well, maybe that's maybe too much. Maybe we could go to 45%. So to change that, you just go back to the scenario page with the management decisions, and I'm going to change that to 45. Then I'm going to hit save. And after it's saved, I'm going to go back to the report. And again, we're looking at 130 here. And so what I can do now is I'm just going to hit refresh on my browser. So we went from 130 to 117, so about $13,000 less. But that's, again, that's overall for all programs. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. And so now what I want to speak to is how do we get to this projected revenue? So I'm going to drill back down into the information. I'm going to go back to this R5 and click on it. And I'm going to explain to you how we get to the projected revenue. So this is the detailed report. Again, it's listing all the programs in R5. So if we scroll back over to the right, you'll see here that the total service area expense per participant is listed here. So what this is we've taken the total cost of the program, divided it by the minimum. And the reason we use the minimum is that this should be consistent or constant from year to year, season to season. Whereas the number registered is going to fluctuate, go up and down, and not be consistent. So when we do the calculation, we wanted to have a constant, if you will, in the calculation. So that's why we use the minimum. So if we take the total cost of the program, which is here, divide it by the minimum, we get a per person cost. That's what this column here is. If we then take the per person cost and multiply it by the cost recovery goal for this service category of 45%, the one we just changed, that would mean the recommended fee would be $79.38. If you were to charge that fee, the $79.38, and get the minimum number of participants, 6, your projected course revenue would be $476. So again, we're taking the cost per participant, multiplying it by the cost recovery goal, getting a recommended fee, multiplying that recommended fee by the minimum number of participants to get your projected course revenue. If we scroll down to the bottom of this report, and we look at the course projected revenue, you'll see that the total course projected revenue for this category is $117,432. If we hit the back button and we look at R5, you'll see that the projected revenue is $117,432. So that's how we get to the projected revenue. So again, this report can be used. I would recommend using this report to see if the information you provided is what you want it to be, or is what is as accurate as it can be, to then help you make the decision using this column here of what your actual goals or your cost recovery goals are going to be by a service category. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.